So today what we're going to do is we're going to review how to prevent burnout. And some of you might be experiencing some of that. And if not, maybe you or your employees or your family members have been a little stressed in the last 9 months. It's been a challenging 9 months. So what we're going to talk about is the physiology of decision making, and so that you can optimize your brain to be at its best when it needs to be. So, of course, I have to say that this is educational and informational purposes only. This is not intended to be medical advice. And so moving on from there. So our goals today is I want you to understand and have a sense for the differences between your reactive brain and your smart brain. You may think that you have just a brain. We're learning more and more about the brain, and what we're finding is that there is the fast reactive brain and then the slow responsive brain. And how we eat really influences that. We want to understand how food frequency and type influence your brain, and then make sure that you have achievable tools to use for your home or offer your office or offer your clients. I know because there's many of you, some of you will be listening for yourself. Maybe some of you will be listening for a spouse or a teenage child who's really struggling. And others of you might use these tools to help with your client management. And that's all fine because we're all human. This all applies to us being human. But we're going to start with you. And just because this is such a unique opportunity, we're going to do a survey about power supply in the legal profession. And it's going to be all anonymous. So I want you to just notice, where is your power supply this morning or this afternoon? I guess we've moved into the afternoon. And where is it generally? And I want you to notice just take note that if your power supply is hovering somewhere in the 5-6 range all day long, that's really hard. And what we want to do, and hopefully at the end of this seminar, you will have some more tools to bring your energy supply up 5-10%, which would be great. We want to make sure that our power supply runs somewhere in the 8 to 9 range. So moving on to the poll question, I'm curious to what is your power supply? So this is all anonymous, so no one will ever know. But if you could note that if you're, at a 1, that's exhaustion. At a 3, that's fatigue. Basically getting the basics done, getting the essentials done, and 7 would be good energy. You can handle whatever comes and you need to rest at the end of the day. And then great energy, you can just handle whatever comes. So what we're seeing is people are in the 5 to 7 range today, which was good. What I hope is that if we surveyed you in a week, that there would be more of you in that 7 to 10 range. So I'm going to talk about 2 studies because I think they're usually the most interesting studies. But what we're going to talk a lot about today is your glucose control, and I'll go into more detail of that. But just to summarize some of the research, there is significant research on how you eat and when you eat, and how that affects all of these conditions. When I spoke at the Superior Court Judges Conference in 2019, I was looking at the agenda and I was shocked to see that more than 50% of the talks had to do with mental health, and just came into sharp awareness of how much lawyers in the legal profession is dealing with mental health. And some of that is impacted by food insecurity, and how we feed ourselves and how we give ourselves permission to take care of our bodies. So 2 studies, these are this first study is what helps me get into law firms to do talks, and because it's really shocking. Some of you have already seen this, but in this study, what they did was they had judges read files for parole. They thought they were in an implicit bias study. And so, of course, they were trying to monitor themselves the best they could because of the study. And but what the researchers were looking at is how decisions were different immediately before a meal or approaching mealtime and immediately after a meal time. And what they found is immediately after a meal, 65% of the files were considered for parole. However, immediately before a meal, 0. Like, that is such a big difference. And so usually when I have this in front of people who might be going to court, their question is always like, how do you know when the judge last ate? And that would be in consideration. But one of the things that talking to judges and lawyers is what I've heard is often the most challenging cases are put right before lunch or at the end of the day, where maybe we should be thinking about putting the easiest cases then when we have a better glucose supply to our brain. The other study, and so people are like, well, what's the economics of feeding people and that it makes a difference? And so there was this study that had 67 adults with major depressive episode, and they were broken into 2 groups. One went to 7 sessions with a dietitian, and the other really just not even therapy, just somebody to talk to. And when the group went to the dietitian, what they found was that there was less medical costs, but also less missed days at work and unpaid work. And so this is when people look like they're working, but they're not actually working, and that was a $2,000 difference. And so before COVID, this was often for people who are managing offices were like, if we put food into the cafeteria that has some protein in it and has some carbohydrates, maybe we will have less depression in our office. And I have seen that to be true. Now that we're in COVID and working remotely, we'll talk about some things later on how to address that. But how we eat has a real effect on our actual performance in the workplace. So let's understand the physiology of that. So there are many ways to slice and dice a brain. We're going to do it this way. There's the prefrontal cortex, which is the responsive, creative, problem-solving memory part of our brain. And how our brain gets information is when our senses send information to it. And so sight, sound, smell, taste, body sensation. And there's a new sense that in the research, it's called introspection. And that is being able to look within ourselves and discern what is going on. And when there's no adrenaline, all of our sensory input goes into the top part of our brain. However, when there's any adrenaline in the system, it all drops into our limbic system. And the limbic system is about fight, flight. Some of you may know about freeze. Humans mostly don't freeze, but we disappear. And disappear is where we're like, la, 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 where we're focused on one thing. This could be Ben & Jerry's ice cream, Facebook, Netflix, alcohol, marijuana, where we just want to close what we see of the world and contain it so that we are emotionally in control of what's happening. When that happens, the limbic brain takes over our hippocampus, which decides where our attention and emotions and planning and behavior go to. So this is why we see the difference in those studies with the judges reviewing parole, is these are the 2 different brains. The brain that is not letting people out for parole or considering them for parole is a very conservative, survival-based brain, where the prefrontal cortex is a much more responsive and creative brain and can see nuance. Well, where does adrenaline come into the system? Well, if a bear came into the room where you're sitting right now, you would know why that you are having a big adrenaline response. However, what happens when we go long periods of time without eating is that adrenaline is released in the cocktail that's going to help make more glucose for your brain. We're going to go into more details about that. So how long does it take before we get that adrenaline response? So if we have a piece of toast or a bagel for breakfast, and of course with caffeine, is our glucose in our bloodstream is going to go up, and then it's going to come back down because insulin is the hormone that is going to allows glucose to get into cells. And our prefrontal cortex is going to have a sufficient power supply for about 1.5 to 2 hours. And as we move beyond that window, what's going to happen is we're going to get another adrenaline hit. And it's just going to slowly seep out. And it's almost imperceptible until something happens. I put this top line in because there's another reason. I just wanted to point out there's another reason why we crave sugar or alcohol. And when we eat sugar or drink a glass of wine, within 20 minutes, because of some physiology, we get more tryptophan and serotonin to our brain. And serotonin tells our lizard brain everything's okay. So at the end of a bad day, our tendency is to go home and want to have a glass of wine or Ben & Jerry's ice cream to make ourselves feel better. And certainly in the last 9 months, I have had ample opportunity to think about that and do that. And now because I know this physiology, what I do is I scoop out a couple of scoops of ice cream, and I say to myself, I can have more, but after I wait 20 minutes. So instead of eating the entire pint in one sitting, I wait 20 minutes, and generally my brain is feeling full of glucose, and I'm getting signals that everything's okay, and I don't need to eat the entire pint of ice cream. So how we avoid the adrenaline hit, certainly I did this in medical school, is just eat sugar every 2 hours. Because then we're just getting a continuous glucose supply to stay into our smart brain. Some of you who have worked with clients who may have experienced enormous trauma in their lifetime, you may notice that they're just eating sugar or drinking soda all the time. Understand that that's a behavior to stay in their smart brain and not go down into that survival brain that has wiring that may not be appropriate when they're sitting in your office or going to the courtroom. So let's talk about what happens when we go too long without eating. So we have declining fuel to our brain because we've gone 3 or 4 or 5 hours without eating. The adrenaline is a part of a hormonal cocktail that seeps out and stimulates the liver to make glucose for our brain. However, fat tissue, always available for deposit. It just sits there and is like, come on in, have a seat. We'll just wait until the next famine to let you go. But it just sits there. It takes in calories all the time. So we cannot make glucose out of fat. We can only make it out of protein. And that protein is either going to come from our diet or it's going to come from our muscle mass. If we are using it from our muscle mass, we are essentially over time decreasing our metabolic rate, which is decreasing the number of calories that we can eat in a day. This is why quick weight loss programs never work, because first you lose muscle mass and now you have a smaller metabolic rate, which means when you start eating what you want, you gain weight faster. We have seen more than 1 billion people do that experiment. It's not a worthy experiment. The other thing that muscle mass does for us is it makes brain fertilizer. Like if you want to live long live independently, stave off dementia, moving your muscle mass and building muscle mass is essential part of doing that. And so that's called exercise. The other thing that exercise does is it helps us prevent insulin receptivity diseases such as diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and dementia. And so when I look at the physiology, the thing that I think to keep ourselves healthy longest is to increase our muscle mass and avoid using the muscle mass as a way of feeding our brain. So here's just a quick summary that our brain will use our body for fuel if it's not fed. When our body is using fuel, it requires adrenaline. Our body doing that frequently over years decreases our muscle mass, decreases our metabolic rate, decreases our ability to make new connections in our brain. Who doesn't need to learn faster? And increases the exposure to adrenaline and downplays that really smart prefrontal cortex that we want to use. And so overall, we see that willpower is lower and we're responding more from a fight or flight and play the old record, react from the past than what we would like. So what's our solution? Well, physiologically, what happens when we eat protein with carbohydrates, not just straight protein, is that we have a longer power supply that will last 3 or 4 hours, which is why we always want to pair protein with carbohydrates. And then, of course, you want to put some fiber in there because that's good for your gut. And you want a little bit of fat because our whole body, every single cell is made out of a little fat. But we're really focusing on that protein carb in order to optimize brain function. So what we see is when people are eating protein throughout the day, they have more energy, more stable moods, less depression and anxiety, better sleep, less early morning waking. Any of you have that 3 a.m. committee meeting waking where your brain wakes up and is like, he should have said, and I should have said, and I'm going to do this, and da-da-da-da, and it talks to you for about 2 hours? That's an adrenaline hit. And what happened is your brain ran out of glucose in the middle of the night and hit the adrenaline button, and your committee woke up. And we're going to talk about using lizard brain treats to solve that problem. The other thing that people struggle with is fatigue, particularly afternoon fatigue. So like 8 hours after you get going, 8 to 10 hours after you get going. So right before you go home or you go back into the house to deal with the kids. What I find is people who skip breakfast, they tend to have more afternoon fatigue. If you're a non-breakfast eater because you're not hungry, that's normal. Your digestive system's pretty shut down if you're hopped up on adrenaline. And so what I do is I have people drink a little bit of fruit juice when they wake up in the morning, and generally they'll be hungry within 20 to 30 minutes. By eating protein throughout the day, we increase our metabolism and our muscle mass, and we're less hungry. So how much protein should you eat? Well, what I find is that people need to be getting between 65 and 80 grams of protein to optimize their brain function. Now, how much protein you should be getting in terms of RDA is based on your weight. And so the simple formula is 8 grams per 20 pounds of body weight. If you were over 250 pounds, I kind of max out at the most is 120 grams of protein in a day. But really for the experiment, and I like doing experiments with people to see if you can just have more energy and mental clarity, I would target getting 65 to 80 grams divided throughout the course of the day. Because what we want to do is lower the anxiety, lower your agitation, because the agitation, anger, and anxiety all come from that survival part of our brain. And separating, is it hypoglycemic or is it emotional? So I was working with a lawyer who did a lot of depositions with his clients, and I said to them, I asked him, I said, I bet your clients struggle the most at 3 o'clock. And he's like, yes, that is true. And I was like, feed them at 2:30. And he's like, okay, I will. And they were better able to keep the emotional control and stay within answering the questions that he wanted them to. So let's talk about different tools that you can have in your box. So lizard brain treats, this is part of what we use in dependency court system when I was working with CETA, is that we, before clients went to their first shelter care hearings, parent allies would make sure that the parent got something to fuel their brain, something with a little carbs like juice and a handful of nuts. And certainly the meth addict who was coming down and detoxing, like, it was hard to see the difference. But the mom who was entering dependency court because she had left a 10-year-old with a 7-year-old and a 3-year-old because she was working 2 jobs did a lot better because her brain had fuel to take in the information that at that moment. And in the Spokane court, the lawyers actually funded the protein cart because it was easier on them to not have a client who is emotionally struggling because they hadn't eaten maybe in 5 hours, maybe in a couple of days. Lizard brain treats or lizard brain meals is a second tool that we can use. Actually, I'm going to go back to lizard brain treats. So lizard brain treats, different places that they can be used. So this is where, if you're waking up at 3 a.m., that's a good place to use it. If you find yourself really anxious or agitated, or if you're in a household with teenagers or kids and they're really anxious or agitated, like, don't talk to somebody who's mad or falling apart, because you can't. There's no responsive brain. Feed it and then come back in 10, 15 minutes. Consistently, I see that. Sometimes I have clients come in, they're like, la, 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 la. And now, because I'm not in the same office, I just tell them to go to the kitchen and get some food. And they come back with a little juice and nuts, and within 10 minutes, they click in. I'm like, what is going on? And that's what you want to see with a lizard brain treat. If you wake at 3 a.m. or have PTSD nightmares, that's another place to use lizard brain treats. So it's a quick fuel. The juice is there to get to immediately turn off the adrenaline button, and the protein is a slow backup. Moving on to lizard brain meals. So lizard brain meals is when you know that you're going to have a long time, 3 to 4 hours, that you need to be in your best brain, your smart brain, and to have protein with carbs right before you go do this. An example of this is I was working with a law firm. A senior partner brought me in. He made it clear that the rest of the partners were not excited to have a naturopath wasting their lunch hour. One of them came up to me and said that he had to schedule a client halfway through. I totally understood, no problem. I got far enough into the talk before he left that he raised his hand and he said, the client I'm going to go see at 12:30 is an asshole. And you're telling me that if I feed him right before I meet with him, he'll be better. And I said, yes. So he got up, gave half of his sandwich to the admin. The admin put him in his office with a half a sandwich and came to get the lawyer 10 minutes after he had been in the office. And so he departed, and I finished my talk. As I was wrapping up after the talk, he came in and he was like, that was the best meeting I've ever had with that client. How do I get him to eat before we talk on the phone? And I was just like, I don't know, but you now can figure that out. And One of the ways that I've seen people do that is there are these companies where they'll send healthy boxes of treats, and they're just sending it out to their clients or to their staff as a tool to say, I care about you, and to help them be in their best brain. So here's the experiment, if you choose to do it, to see if this helps you have more energy and mental clarity. And that is to have protein every 3 hours. Are you going to do it every 3 hours for the rest of your life? No, you're going to do it every 3 hours for 3 days, just to see if it helps you have more energy and mental clarity and have more energy at the end of the day. One of the things that I really wanted for the judges when I was working with them, and I really want for you, is that at the end of the day, you have bandwidth to be with your family or do a hobby or do something that you enjoy. And when you're burnt out at the end of the day, then you have given all of yourself to that day. And why are you working this hard? And so we want to improve your energy so there's something left for you. So here's what we're going to do is within an hour of waking, you're going to have 2 eggs, a piece of toast, and an apple. If you don't like eggs, don't eat eggs. Have sausage. Just get some protein. In your handouts, you will find there is a chart that helps you see how much protein is in different things. And we're going to review some of that, but you have a lot of handouts. And if you have any questions, you can always email me, and I have a lot of information on my website, and there's a book coming out. So there's ample opportunity to get the information, but what we're going to cover today is so for breakfast, you're going to get up and you're going to eat within an hour of waking. If you're not hungry, you're going to use just a little bit of juice or something sweet, a little spoonful of honey, anything that has sugar in it to prime your system so that your digestive system is interested. Another tool that I use for people who just have not eaten for breakfast is to just start with a protein shake, like a Odwalla protein shake, and just start there. 3 hours after that, you're going to have a handful of nuts or a spoon of nut butter, just a little protein to throw into your body and say, here, eat this, don't eat me, which will keep your glucose supply stable. At lunch, what you're going to do is you're going to, if you're an omnivore and eat, you're going to have meat the size of a deck of cards. And that could be in a sandwich, it can be a wrap, it can be in a soup, it can be a burrito, but you want to eyeball that you are eating enough protein. And then you're going to have another snack. And then back to the protein idea. For those of you who are plant-based with your diet, there in the handout, there are ideas for vegetarians and vegans. If you're having any sleep issues, particularly waking up in the middle of the night, having a little bit of protein before you go to bed, that can be turkey or meat. Don't use cheese and milk as your primary source of protein. It doesn't work for everybody. So generally what I see is that when people do this experiment, they will have a minimum of a 20% increase, if not a 50% increase in their energy. It kind of depends on what else is going on in your body. But most people feel better when they're fueling their brain consistently throughout the day. It's nice to have snacks on hand. So part of this diet is to make sure that you have things easy to go things. And so getting tot boxes of juices that you could get out of Trader Joe's. Cliff Bars are nice for the people who don't want to do peanuts, particularly if you're giving it to clients. Non-nut bars or Scout bars. There are also nut packs that you can get from Trader Joe's or Costco. Nut butter packs are nice. And then shelf stay. If you work with low income population or a population that's done a lot of meth and you are supplying them with protein, make sure that you have shelf-stable protein shakes like Orgain, because they may not have teeth. The other thing about protein bars, which tend to be the go-to for a lot of people, is you have to make sure that it not only has protein, but has carbohydrates, because a lot of protein bars are high in protein and are in the keto, paleo, and are really low in carbohydrates. I was a coach called me and said that he was going to have a partner in a firm call me because she was going to quit, and he made her promise to meet with me before that, and so she came in. This was before COVID. Came in. I'm like, "What's going on?" And she's like, I hate my job. I love my job, but like I am just so emotionally uncomfortable all the time, and I don't know why, and I don't need this. And I'm like, I checked in. She really liked her job. Like she couldn't identify anything that had changed. She liked her husband. Like all things seemed to be going well. And so I asked her what she was eating, and she had decided that she wanted to lose weight. And so what she was doing high protein, no carb protein bar for breakfast, high protein, no carb for lunch, and then having a Caesar salad with salmon delivered to her. So essentially she was getting no carbohydrates all day long. And so she was on adrenaline all day long. And so I switched her to Cliff Bars and made an appointment 2 days later and said, before you quit your job as a partner, which is a really big deal, I want you to come back in and we'll just do the next step and see if we're going to make that decision. At the end of Tuesday, she called me and was like, the Cliff Bars are helping. I love my job. I'm too busy to come in. Talk to you later. So you have to think about how you're fueling your brain, and hopefully you will have a little more information based on this seminar to make different choices about how you fuel your brain. So I like to talk about 15% solutions. I am a little new to the Q&A, and so I don't like pinning people in, but I'm actually going to pin you in on this, which is, what is your 15% solution that you think that is worth trying for yourself or somebody else? Are you going to use snacks throughout the day to be less agitated or anxious? Are you going to eat protein at every meal to have more energy? Are you going to have protein before you go to bed to sleep better? Have a lizard brain treat for early morning waking committee meetings? Or give a lizard brain treat to children or clients when they're melting down? What is the most useful tool or 15% solution that you might have picked up today? Great. So people are going to try snacks, and they're going to eat protein at every meal, and they're going to try protein before they go to sleep. Thanks so much for answering that question. Awesome. So just a little bit about myself. This is where you can find me. And in February, I have a book called Fuel Your Brain, Not Your Anxiety, which is based off of the information we talked about today. You can find that where you buy any of your books. It's already pre-orders available. So we have a little bit of time for Q&A, and so I'm going to let Devora see if there are any questions I can answer. And be sure to look at the handouts. I left you a lot of handouts. I think they're mostly self-explanatory at this point.
We do have a lot of questions. Thank you, everybody. One of the more common questions was, could you please explain this approach and how it interacts with the intermittent fasting model?
Yeah, so that's a really common question. And so intermittent fasting is a great health tool. and it needs to be used appropriately. And so to me, what intermittent fasting is like 12 hours. So you have dinner at 7 or 6 and you stop eating at 7 and then you start eating again at 7 a.m. So that works well. What I find with intermittent fasting and professionals who need to be in their most creative brain is it doesn't work very well. And particularly it doesn't work very well over time. The other group of people that I find that intermittent fasting does not work well with is people who have any PTSD or have historic trauma. Because when we have historic trauma, our lizard brain has extra receptors on it that's scanning for adrenaline release. And so people who have historic trauma have a harder time ignoring that signal, and they will slip faster into their lizard brain. And so if somebody's successfully doing intermittent fasting and they're getting all their nutrients in, which is another thing that can happen when people are doing really long intermittent fasting, is they're not getting sufficient protein and fats and vitamins and minerals because the window is so narrow. And over time, what I see is people start cheating more and being like, well, if I just eat the cake between these hours, I'm doing a good job. And so I think it doesn't matter what diet we're doing. We have to ask, how is it serving us, and make sure that we are getting our nutrients in. What I find dividing protein and carbs and fiber and fat over the course of the day, it's easier to get our core nutrients in so that our power supply from our body can fuel our brain. I think we have time for one more, at least one more.
We do. What is your recommendation around fat-free foods?
So I'm not a big fan of fat-free foods. I like people to move towards whole food diets as much as possible. And because we need fat in our body, because every single cell is made of fat. And what tends to happen with fat-free foods is that there are a lot of carbs in fat-free foods. And what we know is that the carbs will be made into fat. And so over the last 30 years, we have successfully decreased the amount of fat intake by 30%. And it has not helped with obesity, cardiovascular disease, or diabetes. And so when people are concerned about their health, and particularly around diabetes and cardiovascular disease, what I really encourage them to do is go to more real foods so that they're eating protein made of meat and vegetables made of whole vegetables and whole grains in which they cook themselves. And so their food is not coming out of packages, and eating avocados as a fat source and olive oil as a fat source. And people, their markers for cardiovascular disease, diabetes tends to go better. And then if they're eating low fat, can also be around weight gain. I really encourage exercise.
Okay, great. We have people asking why you did not encourage cheese or milk to be a proper protein source for this plan.
I know. So I'm not saying don't eat cheese or milk. Like, I love cheese. However, I have worked with a number of people, and I was one of these people for 15 years, what I call pasta dairy vegetarians. And these, and as well as myself, were people who rely mostly on cheese and milk as a protein source. And even though the label says there's enough protein, when I look at their lab work, they don't have sufficient levels of protein, and so it doesn't appear that they're absorbing it. And as we age, we lose the ability to break down lactose, and I think it's mucking up our ability to bring in protein. And you may be different, and your genetics might be different. And so what I have people do who are like, but I love grilled chili sandwich, and I'm really good at physiology. You all are really good at living in your body. And so what I have people do who are attached to their grilled cheese sandwiches is have grilled cheese sandwiches and a side of turkey slices or something to get their protein in. See if they have better sustained energy for a few days and then go back to their grilled cheese sandwich. And what they consistently report is that indeed their energy does not sustain as long. And either on days that it's important, they get their turkey in or their chicken in. And on the weekends when they don't care, they just have their grilled cheese sandwich because they love it, which is fine. We should all eat food that we love.
Some people asked about how exercise or afternoon naps might figure into this plan and maybe take the place of one of the protein boosts.
Oh, well, I wouldn't say take the place of one of the protein boosts. I would have a handful of nuts and take a 20-minute nap. If you like napping, like the research on short naps, which is under 45 minutes, is phenomenal for cognitive performance. Like it for some people, they are as refreshed as though they had woken up in the morning. So like a power nap is an awesome thing to do. In terms of exercise, again, you have to find a place in your life and the amount of exercise that improves your cognitive performance. At least that's always my goal. And so what I have found is that if I get some light exercise in the morning, particularly outside and walking outside, my ability to get my charting done while my patient is in the room or immediately after they leave is so much better. And if I don't get movement before my clinical practice, then I'm staying an hour finishing my chart notes. And I'll tell you what, I will go walk for 15 minutes outside just to get that cognitive boost. And so getting some exercise in is great. And it's finding the amount and kind that improve your cognitive performance. And it's a little tricky finding that metric that you're like, oh yes, this is improving my cognitive performance, which is shortening the time in which it takes you to think. I would still get protein in throughout the day. And again, these are just tools for you to experiment. It doesn't have to be super rigid. I'm just encouraging you to try the 3 days of protein, to try lizard brain treats, to try a meal of protein right before something that's really important, to see if it makes a difference for you. And that's how we learn what's best for our body, which will change each decade that we move through life.
Thank you. That was another question people had about would this change as we age? So you answered that generally. We had also people asking about choices of food as it relates to fatigue after one eats. If somebody feels fatigue or a bit of a drop after eating, are there any protein choices they should avoid or actually seek when doing the 3-day experiment?
So there's two reasons, and you'll have to play around with it, that people get the most fatigue right after they eat. Is one, they either ate a carb heavy meal or they didn't get any carbs in their meal. And so sometimes when I'm working with people and they're like, oh, I'm just really dragging it, I ask them, well, what did you have for lunch? And they're like, well, I had a salad and it had some protein and it had some veggies in it. But there was no really carb source. Maybe there was croutons, but many people have learned to pull off the croutons. And so their body has to still convert those vegetables or that meat into a glucose supply. And so finding a small little sugar treat. So like I have these small coconut macaroons that I like. And so I'll have today I'm going to have some stir fry and I forgot to put some rice on it. And so I get one of those little cookies, and because that'll be my sugar hit. And so going back to eating too many carbs. So sometimes people will go and have pasta for lunch or something that's really carby, and they get such a big insulin hit that they kind of get sleepy. And after a whole bunch of carbs, we get serotonin, then we get melatonin. And so that makes them sleepy. So I would pull back on the heavy carbs and get a little more vegetables and protein in, or just plan on a 20-minute nap because you're going to get that boost. So I think that's all the time that I have for questions. And I so appreciate your time and attention. And if you have any questions, you can email me directly. And I'm going to hand it off to Nicole, who's just going to follow up on other ideas on how to make your workplace healthy. So thank you very much.